A very good morning to all of you. So we have a wonderful panel, very diverse. Some of us have been talking. The first three of us have been on several panels together. So we were discussing in the morning how to liven it up so that you don't hear the same kind of content from us. So we're going to do that. But let me start by asking you, how many of you were there at the musical performance last evening? By show of hands. All right. Quite a few. And, I want to start with that as the metaphor. So, what you witnessed yesterday is called a Jugalbandi. And Jugalbandi is an Indian word which is saying that there is a conversation taking place amongst the musicians on stage. If some of you are fond of jazz, you would experience the same concept there. Technically, no two jazz performances are the same. No two Indian musical performances are the same because it's a conversation, right? I mean, it's broadly has a theme, but it's not supposed to be a replica of what you did last time. Now, today we are living in a world where one of the biggest drivers for development is actually technology. That's a concept I think all of you would agree. Our panel, of course, agrees with that idea. And for that technology to play a role in development, you need a Jugalbandi amongst a variety of players. You need Jugalbandi between people who bring public technology to the table. They can be academics, sometimes it can even be private companies. But people who are public technology builders. It could be think tanks like iSpirit, but you also need people who bring private innovation to the table. And usually, of course, those are private players that we are talking about. And very often the builders of this are all in the realm of where Bharatang is, they're coders, right? And so they are there part of the process. Governments are obviously part of the process. Non-profits are part of the process. Regulators are part of the process. So really, how do we create music from all of these different types of players that we have so that we get the right development outcomes? This is a very difficult question to answer, is it not? Right? And yes, there are stories. India has a good story to tell. There are good stories from Bangladesh. There are good stories from many, many places. And but the question is, what can we learn from these performances? What are the principles that will guide this as we go forward? So we're going to open this up in our panel, but I'm going to start with something which is to set the stage in a very unusual way by kind of leaning on Erin, who has had a big life event. Erin, what has happened 10 days ago? And how has that to do with somebody else on the panel here? Do share that with us, please.
If I can stop laughing, I'll share it. So yes, 10 days ago I got married. Thank you. But I met my now husband, on Bumble. So that was a very nice connection today when I got to message home and go, you'll never believe who I'm on a panel with.
So let me start with you, Mahima. Part of creating this magic, bringing people together, is to create the safe space, right? And I think Bumble is focused on making that happen. And that's true for many things that will need to happen, right? Safe for citizens to engage with other people and data gets involved in this. Tell us a little bit about what have been your learnings about creating these safe spaces, and has it involved even building public technology to make that happen?
Yeah, thank you so much. Congratulations again. Something about ORF and relationships. I once had to explain my engagement at an ORF event because the timing just matched with one of our sessions. More later. But yeah, thank you for the question. I think there are a couple of themes that I can go across in a quick manner. The first is, when we talk about development, there is a term that the Sherpa, has used, which is we want to move from women's development to women-led development. And I think a company like Bumble is a really good example of the innovation that is happening on the internet. So for example, I've been working in the tech sector, in the private tech sector for about 10 years. And my previous company, there were women users, but they were part of the pool of users, right? And so the experiences of women were always different. We know that harms and the benefits, different people experience those differently on the internet, and we try and cater to that. But if you look at a second generation of apps coming, like a Bumble, which has come 7 or 8 years after maybe the big social media companies were invented, they are also trying to solve a problem. And what's the problem? Why are there still less women on the internet? Right? Why are their experiences different? And the truth is because women actually experience a lot of friction when they come online. Now, from a banking perspective and from other fundamental perspective, mobility, employment, there have been a lot of solutions. But if you look at spaces, safe spaces where women are exchanging information, where there's social media, for example, unwanted contact is one of the biggest reasons why women avoid interaction online. Whether it is text that you did not invite, whether it's lewd images that you did not ask for, these are real experiences that happen to real women. So a Bumble, as an example, by its very design, allows the woman to make the first move. Now, this is a catchy slogan when you're looking for a new app to send to market. But in reality, what it does is it actually gives you a layer of safety because you're not inundated with messages. To your point, getting lewd pictures online is another reason why women don't want to spend their extra time on new apps and new spaces. So Bumble developed proprietary technology that actually blurs these pictures on arrival, which really help women not have to see images that they did not want to see. And that technology has been actually open sourced and given to the rest of the internet ecosystem to say, if you are creating a space today and you're going to have women users and you think this could be a problem, you don't need to create your own solutions. You can actually use this. So I think apps like Bumble, which are tapping into newer problems and newer opportunities that exist online, have to basically look at what is the reality of the experience of the last 10 years? What are the places where maybe we haven't innovated as much? And then use all the technical prowess, and not just technical, but sort of understanding what's happening on the societal level and try and innovate to solve that. And I think that's what
Very nice. And clearly this focus on the persona, it allows you to think of all of those things. And one of the concepts that I think we've been promoting here in India is this techno-legal regulation, that if you want to shape good behavior of people, you need public policy, but you also need public technology. And you brought public technology to the fore and applied your own policies, to get the outcomes that you seek. May I come to you, Anir? This whole area of data, safety, also requires public policy, right? And we are still in an area where the data regime, the regulatory regime for this is not yet decided. We don't even know whether we'll have a global regime, whether all countries will come on the same page in the end. But certainly we are in the interim period where everybody is trying to formulate stuff. There's good CDR efforts in Australia, for example. There are India, hopefully in this parliament session, will pass its digital, personal data protection bill. There's stuff that's happening in Bangladesh. What is your view? How far are we away from getting some clarity on what would be this public policy with respect to data? From your vantage point, what are you seeing?
Thank you, Sharad. Good morning, everybody. Very important question. So Bangladesh started somewhat late in terms of its digitization journey, really about a decade and a half. And we've been grappling with the issue of over-regulation or premature regulation, so that you stifle innovation by regulating too early. And also making sure the safety, security, privacy, all these issues are addressed at the right time. So there is that fine balance that we're trying to strike. I'll give you one example from COVID. During COVID, the first few months when COVID happened in Bangladesh, March of 2020, we realized that we did not have enough RT-PCR labs. Actually, in a country of 170 million people, we had one lab. Just imagine. One lab in Dhaka, the capital city. And no tests were happening. So we had to come up with something quite dramatic. So we said, okay, we will repurpose our national helpline, 333, which was really used for providing information to citizens about government services, public services. So we said, okay, let people call into this number, and we'll use IVR to get symptoms from people and use artificial intelligence to analyze where the highest concentration of these symptoms. So we had to use AI to clean up the data. But at the end of the day, we were able to actually, with reasonable degree of certainty, able to find where the largest concentration of COVID spread was, so that we could contain, we could do lockdowns, regional lockdowns. And that was very, very effective. We called it syndromic surveillance. A team of 30 data scientists worked over Zoom for 20 days at a stretch to develop this. And we realized later on, even though this was very effective, we probably broke all sorts of privacies, right? But if we did not, we actually would not have this. If we had now we're working on a privacy law, a data protection law. But at that time, if we were saying, okay, now let's focus on a data protection law and make sure that we don't break privacy, then we would not have that system in 20 days. So that's an example of where we need to look at when we apply regulation, where we apply regulation. Now, data has become even more important with the advent of ChatGPT, let's say. So we had been talking about AI for quite some time, but it's now facing us with a lot of potential and a lot of concerns as well. So the issues around data, so privacy, safety, accountability. So who is really accountable? So when we're actually dealing with a lot of this data, who owns the data? Right? Is it owned by the tech companies? Is it owned by the government? Is it owned by individuals? Or is it all of the above in some shape or form? We actually don't have a clear answer on these. And then the issue of informed consent. We collected huge amount of data during COVID for vaccine registration. Every country has done that. And this was done very successfully in Bangladesh, electronically. Even in cases where digital penetration did not happen. I mean, because it had to be done electronically, everybody figured out a way. And they provided huge amounts of data. Now, who owns this data? Is it the Ministry of Health? Is it that series of technology companies that worked with us? Or is it that individual who provided that information? Can we use this information for other types of service provision? Because it's such rich information taken just for COVID vaccination. Can we use this for other types of health services? Can we use this for land registration? Because now we can correlate across multiple ministries. So these are all things that are facing us. And we're trying to understand what the right regulation, right guardrails will be to protect each individual, and also make sure that there are turf issues across organizations within the public sphere. So Ministry of Health, even within Ministry of Health, we have the Directorate General of Health Services and the Directorate General of Family Planning. They don't typically share data because they have slightly different jurisdiction. So can they now share data? We're now working on pregnancy monitoring using artificial intelligence and wearable computing, very frugal wearable computing. Data is coming in from those IoT sensors. So now who owns this between Ministry of Health's Director General of Health Services and Family Planning? So these are very interesting questions that we're trying to grapple with. We'll find answers, but we don't want to provide answers that stifle innovation. I don't know if I was able to explain.
No, I think you make a very good point. And this is the fundamental debate that is taking place. And in that context, I think the India experiment is particularly interesting. Because India decided that although identity is provided to you by the state, but you own the identity, right? So whether my identity can be used anywhere is in control of the Indian citizen, right? You own, of course, your own money, and which you can transfer to anybody else that you like. Similarly, in India, the data regime is that you own your own data. And therefore, what is India Stack? India Stack is to mediate the flow of all these three things with full control of the citizen at the center of this. And I think that is the concept that is actually, if I was to make a prediction, that would become the mainstream concept of tomorrow. The place where it will not become mainstream is either it's not a democracy, and therefore the government has a vested interest not to do this, or it is controlled by big companies who then have a vested interest not to make that happen. And you can even think of the two big countries that I am subtly referring to here. So this is really, I think, going to be three choices that we have. And I'm hoping that this choice that India has pioneered over the last 10 years, which is now well established, will become the default choice for everybody. But what I like in your story is that you took charge of the problem and with local resources tried to solve that. Because what's important, the other thing that we have to make happen is that we don't create this thing that we are merely consumers of technology. The global south is consumer of technology provided by global north. Global south has to become a producer of technology that solves its own problem. And Bharatung, with your program and with your effort and your passion, is to make that happen, right? Is to create this capacity inside society which will allow for this to happen. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's such an inspirational thing that you're doing, and it has applicability. We need to import it here in India as well and apply it here. So share your learnings from what you've been doing with Girls Who Code.
So I run Girl Hype, which I started 20 years ago teaching women and girls how to code. When I started, it was purely because there was not enough women in technology. The gap was too huge, and purely because also it was the first time I touched a computer when I got to university. I was like, this digital skill and the internet is going to be the biggest thing that we ever see in this world. It's going to change the world. But I thought for academia, I did not realize it's going to be what it is today. And 20 years later, we're still teaching girls how to code. And there's a push for no code, which we've adopted. And why? It's because the world has changed. Computers can code themselves. Deep learning has become the biggest thing. We know with OpenAI that I can write a code in 20 minutes if you know the basics. So what I've learned is, as much as we started thinking about technology in terms of an engineer point of view, technology has now become the deciding factor of who you become in your life. And if we don't have enough women in the tech space, in the decision-making space, it's going to be very difficult. In the past 20 years, academia used to lead the discussions when it comes to what is technology, the regulations, what is needed to drive that. And part of that, the 10 years, the big tech companies have taken over. And OpenAI has become the deciding factor of who now is in charge of AI. They're starting an academy. It's like, where does academia fall? When you think about regulations, who is in charge? And development of the people that we thought we are developing when we start teaching people how to code, building digital skills, is it really impacting what technology is going to be in the next coming 5 years? So data has become such a big, big thing that we're not just teaching how to code now, we're focusing a lot on data analytics. What does it mean for you that's on the internet?
And why I'm excited about what you're doing is because if you go back, to at least what happened before, let's say 1930s or so, most of science and technology was citizen science and citizen technology, right? And academic institutions had come up, but it was still driven by citizen science. And Louis Pasteur, or Edison, right? They were citizen scientists, citizen technologists. And then we created an institutional structure in academia to drive this as we go forward. And in AI, we are seeing that, the power is returning back to citizen technologists all over again. And what you're creating is this base of citizen technologists, people who feel empowered to think broadly and do stuff. And I think digital public infrastructure ultimately has to enable small teams to build complex systems, right? I mean, but because they give them the building blocks to be able to do that. And so your work is very important. And I think India has been blessed because it had a large pool of technologists, at the university level, and we benefited from that. But every country has to create that pool. And so your work is very, very important. Thank you for sharing that. Erin, I want to come to you. You've been, even articulating and of course watching this one-way kind of traffic turn into a two-way traffic, right? What used to be global north to global south is now starting to move also in the other direction. And that's a healthy process, right? And we need this traffic, both sides traffic, to continue. Tell me a little bit from your vantage point, global north vantage point. How does it feel? I mean, what kind of reactions do you encounter? What are the concerns people feel in global north with respect to what this is happening? Are they comfortable with it? What should we be aware of in global south so that we can position it in a way that this traffic increases over time?
Thanks, Sharad. It's a really interesting question to ask me, I think, as an Australian, rather than someone from North America or someone from Europe as a representative of the global north, because I think that if you look at Australia over the last few decades, much of the trajectory our country has been on is looking to Southeast Asia, looking to India, looking to other countries in our region, rather than looking for solutions from the United States or North America in general, or Europe as well. So it's an interesting position to sort of come from. As I said before to all of you, I'm interested in hearing about from Bangladesh, and having researched, done quite a bit of research on, say, digital financial inclusion around the Asia Pacific region. I know that in Australia we have a lot to learn from Bangladesh. We have a lot to learn from other countries around this region in terms of the delivery of public goods and services through digital public infrastructure. In Australia, I think that we're behind on so much when it comes to digital technology, and the way that we conduct ourselves as citizens through technology is quite, I think it's quite slow in a country like Australia. The other observation that I've made throughout the year with the T20 as well is that you talk so much about digital, and we've debated these definitions exhaustively, which we will not go into right now, much to the relief of our task force members who are here. But in Australia, we take a very different approach, and I don't think it's necessarily the right approach. And there's probably a spectrum across G20 countries where we don't really think about digital public infrastructure. I call it digital private infrastructure. It's a government strategy implemented by PwC, which now, as we see, has all kinds of problems in Australia around these consulting firms and their delivery of these, a whole range of programs for governments. But the other thing that I think is really interesting, just an observation from the panel today, and I was writing down some notes as you were all talking, is about these, these multi-stakeholder conversations that we need to be having. So you made the point about academia. Academia still has a role. Is it going to be the leader in these conversations? Probably not. Policymakers often sort of forget the drivers of the private sector. So having the private sector here as part of that conversation is, what is it that's driving you? Stock prices often, not actually, necessarily, the gap that you've identified meets both needs, but at the same time, you're being driven by your commercial imperatives. You see politicians that are driven by their, what are their constituents going to be voting on? And, we see in Australia, technology has there's a big part of that conversation. So in the same time, we need to have both the global north and the global south a part of that conversation as well. And I think that often these things are siloed. And, when I'm working with, say, in an international organisation, they completely forget things like data and the private sector and what they're thinking about. It's a little bit painful sometimes. And similarly, when you're talking to the private sector, and technology companies, they're forgetting what the politicians are thinking about. Although I do think the big tech companies are really, look at the size of the public policy teams that are growing inside these companies. I think they actually get it. They understand these risks. So, you know, it's coming at these issues from all of these different angles, and the global north and south together has to be part of that conversation.
You know, and one area where I think this can really take root, and I'm going to share a little bit of my angst here, if you let me. So what happened is that in this conversation, I think there is a role for civil society. And civil society folks, you know, many of them come from a legal background, some come from public policy background, you know, public affairs background. So many kind of, that community has been well established, right? And they have opinions on almost any meaningful change that is coming about. So some of us as technologists who saw themselves as public technologists wanted to insert ourselves in the conversation. And the mistrust between public technologists and the civil society was extraordinary. And of course, we made a mistake. So when Aadhaar came, as some of you know, the big concern was, does it change the balance of power between citizen and the state? And we would try and sit down and explain, hey, no, it doesn't, and here is why. But it took a Supreme Court hearing, you know, and in fact, 2 hearings, 2 major cases, one on data, it's called the Puttaswamy judgment of 2017, which 9-0 ruled that data privacy is a fundamental right in India, and that's 9-0 judgment, so it's unlikely ever to be overturned. And then subsequently, you know, a year later, another constitutional bench, you know, evaluated Aadhaar against that judgment and concluded that it does not change the balance of power, right? Until that happened, we didn't win credibility with the civil society. Part of the reason was we were also very arrogant, right? So our arrogance disappeared in this battle that took place, and subsequent things like UPI or account aggregator that have come have led to a lot more collaboration. But where am I going with this? I think we need to create a global conversation where the civil society and public technologists have to be able to come together. And one of the things that we have to do, therefore, very well is to call out who is a public technologist and who is a private technologist. Because on the surface, it's not clear. People like me were private technologists. I did a startup and sold it to Cisco. Now, that is private technologist, as anything can be. Then I had a change of heart when I turned 45 and said, no, I should devote my life to something else. But how does anybody know I had a change of heart, right? So the question is, how do you identify public technologists and how do you integrate them into the civil society process? Yeah, and I want to hear from you, because I think these are the conversations, because you have a very strong civil society in Global North. We need to find a way to integrate public technologies there and then cascade this process everywhere else in the world. So it'll be good to hear your opinion.
I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that, okay, so I was, as you're speaking, just trying to bring this back to the G20, like the fact that we're here and why we're here. So what is so great about the G20, and, you know, I've been around these summits since 2015, I probably need to take a break. But anyway, 2015 is that the G20 is so much more inclusive than a lot of other, you know, institutions. And so and the idea of bringing the African Union into the G20 is making it even more inclusive in having those people at the table. And it is multi-stakeholder. And so as we look forward to Brazil, how can we go, okay, well, next year, how can we make sure all of these stakeholders are still at the table, and how are they producing outcomes from this that are contributing to technology for development, as this panel is supposed to be talking about. So I think that is actually what the G20 should be doing and should continue to focus on, is making sure that you actually get that cross. Like, if you look around the room here, I mean, how many people here are from the private sector? A couple of hands. There's a few hands. And who's in the public sector? A few hands. Who's in the think tank? Lots of hands. But, like, that's good, right? So it is the Think 20, but we do have private sector representatives here. We do have public sector representatives here. And this platform, we should be going, what do we actually want to get out of this Think 20? What does that mean in terms of driving this conversation forward? And obviously, you know, it's been a massive effort this year. But that's what needs to continue, and making sure we have all of these people represented. One of the problems, India's been brilliant at this, is bringing everyone here and bringing everyone to the table, because in previous years, I've been at summits where you have almost, lots of global north representatives, hardly anyone from the global south. Why? Because it costs a fortune, because you can't get visas, all of these complexities. So I think India's done that really well. It's actually getting a much better spread of people here.
So we are almost out of time. We have I maybe want to start with you and move this and conclude very quickly. So don't take maybe just about 30 to 45 seconds. The question that I have is, to what extent will AI act as an impetus to take this revolution of technology as a tool for development to its logical conclusion? From your vantage point in Bangladesh, how are you viewing AI as a forcing function to resolve these open questions, figure out a path forward, and get it done quickly? Is that happening? And maybe, the same question for everybody here.
I think AI has accelerated technology adoption much more quickly than anything else ever before. So the way I see it is that technology adoption requires certain level of literacy, not digital literacy, just basic literacy. AI is ensuring that you don't need any literacy to be digital literate, because you can actually speak to the machine in any language now. I think what India has done, many other countries have done, is to bring in other languages than English. We were all looking at Western languages, English, German, Spanish, but now we're seeing Southern languages, especially Indian languages, being part of the AI process. So AI is making digital literacy completely possible, which basically means that anybody can actually become a user innovator. There is a professor of MIT, Eric von Hippel, who talks about the concept of a user innovator, user actually innovating with technologies. And Sharad, you talked about this building blocks. So India Stack is a really good example of that. In Bangladesh, we're building something called the IDX Stack, Inclusive Digital Transformation Stack, very similar to India Stacks with some changes to the Bangladeshi context. So AI is making that democratization of technology, democratization of building technology, because we don't need to code anymore. The concept of coding has disappeared. You can actually speak and build things. On the other flip side of AI is that it's actually making a lot of skills, human skills, obsolete. It's actually wiping away a large number of skills demand that were the perfect domain of human beings. AI is taking over. So that's something we are quite aware of. We published a report in Bangladesh, 2019, before COVID, that we would actually lose about 55 million jobs in the next 20 years. Because of, that was the early stage AI. Now it's going to be much more rapid. COVID has proven that things move very, very rapidly. So we're now publishing another report, Future of Work report this year, to look at what is actually going to happen. Which skills remain, which skills actually will be newly created, and which micro skills. We're actually breaking down a particular skill, such as welding or such as driving, so into micro skills. And what are the micro skills that will be automated in future? And what are the micro skills that will remain in the domain of human beings? So we're very clearly articulating that and making sure our curriculum, our skills development process, all the different training organizations in the government and private sector are attuned to that new emerging reality. Thank you.
So it's galvanized things in some ways. Mahima, what are you seeing in your neck of the woods in the private sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every company, if not every institution, is trying to understand how AI can actually turbocharge their progress and how it can respond to many of the issues that they're dealing with. So, for example, if you look at the amount of content being generated online, one of the huge problems that many companies had was actually like dealing with content moderation, responding to the challenges of different kinds of issues. AI is going to make that easier. It is going to help internal systems get easier. And so, every company actually has a task force on AI. They're tracking all the, the best thinking on AI, what's happening with ChatGPT, what's coming after that, how can we integrate it into our product. But I would also caution the other side, which you mentioned in terms of employment, which is the more sophisticated our apps and our houses and our cameras are becoming, and the more we rely on technology to interact with every single person in our life, because you have UPI now, so you don't need to go to the store, and you don't need to meet your friends because you're on a group. What is happening is that there is a danger of people also withdrawing into themselves and becoming a little more disconnected, because tomorrow you don't know if the guy you're meeting on Bumble is speaking himself or taking help from an AI chatbot, right? So I think there is a danger of also losing that little bit of a human element. And as we go ahead and we talk about all the progress this society can make and necessary progress, I think we need to be a little mindful of a generation that's being born into this, does not remember the world before technology, and so can't contrast between the two and catch itself and say, hey, no. It used to be really nice to play outside without phones, without cameras, just me and my friends. There is no memory of that, and there is no reality of that. So I do, exercise some caution as we build ahead and we go ahead to always remember that human connection at the end of the day.
And I bring you back to the safety aspects. So next year is a year with 4 big elections, right? The Indian election, obviously the largest democratic exercise in the world. And but you will have the American election, you will have the European Union elections, you will also have the Taiwanese election, which has, of course, consequences in the context of the geopolitical world. And we possibly know that, what the defining feature of all those elections is going to be? Deep fakes. So can we protect our elections? And this is not something we have time to do. We have less than a year to do this. And how societies are able to make that happen. Remember, techno-legal regulation, using techno-legal regulation, because there's no other way to do it, will determine how robust the democracies will be at the end of this. When we sit here a year from now, or maybe 18 months from now, if we have done this well, the faith in democracy would still be there. If we kind of mess it up, the faith in democracy would have noticeably fallen. So I think, AI is going to bring us some challenges. But over to you, Bharata.
The gaps and the bias that exist on the internet, and knowing that AI is purely data-driven, I think it's very dangerous for a person that looks like me and a woman living in Africa. So I personally think at the moment, that's my biggest concern. Regulations and we have enough people talking about that. I'm more concerned about, the new strategy, the new slogan at Girl Hype is, who told you that? I put it on the wall and I said to the girls, every time you don't know who told you something and you cannot verify if it's true or not, don't come to me and tell me about it. And it's true, because we live in a time where AI really, at the speed and rate that it's going, we need lots of positive. 90% of people should be pro-AI, but you still need 10% of us who say, hey, caution, because this thing is very dangerous to the marginalized and the people that really don't have the voice and power.
Will AI galvanize our efforts, the ones that we've been talking about, or will it slow them down?
There are other experts in this room who can better answer that question than me. Maybe AI can be useful in telling us when we need to keep time for our panels. So I'll end it with that, because I know that they're looking at us over there in the corner.
Please, of course.
Not on AI, but I'll just take 10 seconds. I know that we have run out of time already. But just wanted to thank the G20 process that India has led in the last 9 months, because it's been very inclusive. And I just hope that it continues in future with the new presidency. And also G77 learns from this, because there is a lot of things. Because Bangladesh, for instance, is not part of G20. We're an observer state. But we are part of G77. So the focus on digital public infrastructure and how it can actually completely democratize socially, economically, educationally. So I hope that there are some documents that will tell us, at least in G77, how we can take this forward. Thank you.
So we'll end on that note. I am in the camp which believes that AI is going to be a very, very disruptive force. And that calls upon us to get our act together, to bring this Jugalbandi to life, so that all these diverse types of roles that we all play, and many of you in the room, we have to play music so that it actually makes a difference to society. Thank you so much for being patient listeners.